welcome back, everybody. Holy moly, or as we say in my family, holy vaca. We are in a new year. Welcome to our two guests of the brand new year, Jeffrey Wilcox and Joan Brown.
Good morning.
Hey.
You know, it is hard to believe we ended the very last day of 2024 was our 1200th episode, and we start fresh 1201. And I cannot think of a better topic than training our boards. And so this is going to be a riveting conversation with two experts from third sector company. And I just am thrilled that we can actually start the first day of a new year. I'm also thrilled that we have these amazing presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and I have this delightful assortment of people that are our co-hosts for the Nonprofit Show. And I hope you have gotten to know them as I have. They're just remarkable individuals. But the remarkable folks in the room today come to us from Third Sector Company. Joan Brown, the COO, and Jeffrey Wilcox, president of Third Sector. You know, briefly, Jeffrey, when I first met you, we were talking in the green room. You were one of our very first guests when we started the Nonprofit Show. And I think you mentioned we'd only broadcast like double digits. We were super new. And we got you on, and you really connected me to this concept of interim management, interim leadership. Really briefly, before we move forward, can you touch base on what this concept even is?
Well, thanks, Julia, and congratulations on 1200. That's such an accomplishment.
Thank you.
The idea of interim leadership is really helping not-for-profit organizations to take a pause in building a bridge between their prideful past and giving volunteers a hopeful future. And the truth is, that is a process. That doesn't just happen because someone's walked in to, water the plants and bring the paper in until the new exec arrives. It is a methodical, transformational, profound process of helping organizations to become. And the excitement is to become what? And that is to be as exciting, as important, and as servitude as they've been throughout their history in making better communities. And we're thrilled to be a part of that.
Wow. You know, Joan, it's such an interesting piece of the conversation today because we're going to be talking about board training. But in one way, I feel like our sector needs to be trained up on the concept of interim leadership. That it's, as Jeffrey said, you're not just bringing in the mail and watering the plants. And I know we're going to talk about this more throughout the year, but are you finding that folks understand this concept, or is it still a pretty new concept?
I think it is a fairly new concept, which is sort of amazing to us because third sector's been in this space for a very long time. But there is a growing awareness that organizations have to be more mindful and intentional about what they're going to do about leadership changes. Everybody leaves. And without a plan for that, organizations can find themselves in really difficult situations. The interim solution is part of that. And so we think that there is a growing awareness that we've got to be better about this.
Yeah. You know, we're going to be talking more and more about this concept with you all and your experts about what interim leadership and management means, because it's probably not what you think. And I know it wasn't what I thought until I really started chatting with your team. But part and parcel to this is the board, because so much comes through our board, so much looks through the board, the lens of the board. So let's start kind of at ground zero and ask the question, what makes board training successful? I mean, I can woman up and say that I've been in a heck of a lot of trainings on board service, and I'm like, why did I waste my time? And then others, I'm like, this is amazing. It seems like it's one or the other, So Jeffrey, start us off. Like, what does success look like?
Well, first of all, Julia, I think that we have come to the point where we understand that just because we've provided some training, that doesn't mean that we've provided some learning. And there is a huge concept difference there. Training is telling people about something. Learning something is about helping people to discover. And for boards, I think the operatives here is it's a discovery process of how am I equipped to be the kind of board member this organization deserves? How am I being engaged to be the kind of community leader our community deserves? And how can I be empowered to make a change so the quality of life for all people are being influenced? You don't equip, engage, and empower people through a 3-hour telling. It's a process of people learning their role and being empowered to do that role well.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. This is like a hair on fire moment for me, because the concept of learning versus, just the training and being talked at, that is like mind blowing. I never actually thought of it in those terms. Joan, how do you know the difference?
Well, I think we know that learning has taken place when we see the needle moved. That after whatever our board education has looked like, whether that's in person or by Zoom or whatever it is there a difference at the end of it? If there's not any difference at the end of it, then that was us talking to someone. If
Yeah.
there's real learning, we see that the board has increased alignment around what their job is, around the cause that they're supporting, around steps forward. They are moving as one. That's why we think it's important for board members to take part in educational opportunities together as a group, as opposed to, here's a book, everybody go off and read it by yourselves. We want to align those board members around the things that need improving. We want them to be inspired together to do a better job in this role that they've taken on.
Well, that was going to be one of my big questions for both of you, is like, what does this look like given we're still doing so much, remote work? There are a lot of folks that still are a little uncertain about traveling. We're escalating our workflow. So how do you get volunteers to make a commitment to leave their work? Is this just done on the weekends? I have a million questions only because I sat through a million of these, right? And it's a fascinating thing. So when you look at 2025, and I know it's a new year and there's always new hope, I feel it. There's always great anticipation and excitement. How do we get this done so that we get our board members excited and engaged and not just sitting there looking at their phones, wishing they were somewhere else?
So Julia, the whole idea between training versus learning, the way I learned it was interesting. I should use that word. Is that training is really a digestive process, which is I give you some content, you have to digest it. Learning is a discovery process. And discovery for people is very different than digestive. And so to answer your question is, number one, it's not an event. It's an iterative process. People have to understand, for example, what's the difference between sitting on the board of a literacy organization versus sitting on the board of a book publishing organization? You don't say, nonprofit boards do this. What you have to do is you have to have very individualized discovery of what makes our organization unique in its pursuit of creating a quality of life. The key thing in board training in 2025 is to understand what is the optimal board for our organization to do its best work in the coming year. What is the optimal board? There is no selection on the internet that can tell you that. That's an iterative process of learning and forming consensus on what is our optimal board. And here's what happens. The learning agenda builds the bridge between where we're at and where we want to be. That's not a 3-hour workshop. It's an iterative process of every single board meeting. Are we moving closer to being the kind of board that we want to be, our organization serves, and our community should demand?
So then, Joan, let me ask you this question. As third sector is so involved in the the concept of interim leadership, interim management, transference of power, those things. Is this going to be the same for a board who's like, shoot, our executive director is going to be here till, the cows come home? Or is it like, holy moly, our executive director is aging out, they're going to retire, or, whatever those constraints might be? How do we look at this when we know there's this silver tsunami and there's this changing demographic of leadership leaving us? What does this look like?
I do think boards are more aware than they've ever been that they are going to be affected one way or another. And that part of their board education and learning needs to be a plan for that. That's why we think succession planning is a really important part of board education. What are y'all going to do about that? Somebody is going to leave. And, we can't predict that. We can't lay out a plan for every single leadership transition in our organization, but boards are aware of it. They've seen development positions change almost annually, and they know that that same thing is happening with executive director and CEO positions as well. So I do think there's an openness. We do work with boards who think that their ED will never leave. That's crazy, right? That's a place of denial for you to live in, because that person is going to leave one way or another. They're going to be stepping out. And often there comes a time when boards begin to see that it might be optimal for that person that they thought was going to stay forever to actually move on to whatever's next for them. We all need refreshing and change within an organization. So I do think there's an openness. Those are two different situations, but we would say that both of those boards need the same sort of education around leadership continuity, and would encourage them to look into it sooner rather than later. The time to learn about it is not when you need it, not when it's an emergency, but when you've got some time to be intentional about your planning.
Right. It's so important, because when you're sitting there in a crisis, you make such different decisions, and you're navigating things in such a different way, and that's not always a healthy way. Jeffrey, I'm curious about, when we talk about training in 2025, you mentioned that you think that everybody should be together in the same room. How do you navigate folks that want to do this maybe digitally, or maybe they are in a region, on a regional board or national board, and they're not all coming from the same community? What does that look like, or should it look like?
Well, adult learning will tell us that there's not a one size fits all. I think, Julia, it's a matter of, if you truly are a learning organization and your board is committed to learning, what you do is you don't have one methodology. I think that's the mistake. What you do is you make a commitment to, we're going to be in a room a couple of times, everybody, and we're going to be in a virtual room a couple of times.
Yeah.
But we're also going to have some informal roundtables and discussions. I think one of the things that we're going to have to learn in 2025 is that a board is a body and governance is a process. And board training and governance training are not the same thing. Boards play a role in governance, but boards are not all in of themselves the governance. Governance is a decision-making process. So then we have to look and go, okay, how can we use a variety of methods to create a good governance process and also be learning along the way?
I love that you said that, and I don't hear that enough. That's really masterful, because to me, Jeffrey, when I hear you say that, I just think of the difference between, a pro forma board who's just ticking the boxes versus a board who's really a thought leadership board, and that they're looking forward, out beyond themselves, beyond their individual members, much more thoughtful leadership.
And I do think that in 2025, there's going to have to be a lot more intentionality between balancing our discussions about inward focused and outward focused. We have too many factors that are influencing how our nonprofits are going to impact. We have a new president coming in. We have artificial intelligence. We have changing funding priorities. We have generational transference. We have a number of external factors that if we come into a board meeting and all we're doing is looking inside ourselves, we're actually now doing community work in a cave. And
Yeah.
so our work in 2025 is a balance between what is our place in the world, what is not our place on the balance sheet.
Yeah. I love that you said that. This could not have been a better episode to start the new year, because to me, we need to revisit this. I'm going to use the word approach, because for so many boards, and that means executive directors that are watching us, board chairs that are watching us, board volunteers watching us, a lot of the things that the two of you have said, we can intellectualize, but we're not doing it, right? And so this has been a great discussion to kind of kick us in the pants a little, to say, okay, look, let's shift this up and not just have this be such a rote kind of function, if you will, which I got to say is a heck of a lot easier just to tick the boxes and have your little agenda and your, you don't have to think, you just have to do, right?
It's exactly right. And Joan can speak to this better than I can. The vast majority of our interim executives, when they go into a not-for-profit organization, it's not helping the organization just to prepare for its future. It's also to open the eyes of a board to recognize its role in that future, which means they have to recognize their board is a dynamic. It is not a checkboxing sort of situation. In our interims, part of the reason why we developed our board program is because the amount of time that really needed to be devoted for that organization to have the board needed for an organization to approach its future was significant. It was more than the interim could actually provide themselves while they were there.
Wow. I mean, that's kind of frightening that you would say that. I mean, Joan, we all know that the board hires, the executive director, and that means they're hiring the interim, they're managing that piece of it. It's fascinating to think that the folks that have the keys to the kingdom might really need this training, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's interesting when we look at sort of traditional board training, if we want to use that word. Most of the board training that I've seen over the last 20 years, for sure, has its foundation with board sources, the 10 basic responsibilities of board members. And that's bedrock. There is so much value in that we can't toss it aside. But honestly, that came out in 1988. We for the first time, we're far down the line from that. While those 10 responsibilities are still incredibly important, board members need to know about them. The questions are much different now. We're talking about organizations that are in an ecosystem. They're not standalone. The main concern shouldn't be what's best for my organization, but what's best for this community that we're operating in. How do we deal with leadership continuity? I think in 2025, we're going to see a lot of organizations having to deal with funding issues in a way they've never had to in the past. So it's time to up the questions and sort of up the place that we're going for our information and think more broadly than just check these 10 boxes. Are you doing these things? It's how deeply are you leaning into what your organization needs from you?
I love that. And I appreciate you putting that into perspective. I mean, think about what life was like in 1988. I mean, most people didn't even have email then, if you think back, right? I mean, so we've navigated in a whole new way of behavior, managerially, socially. Fascinating to think that maybe that is, as you said, it's the bedrock, but it needs to be refined or added onto. I want to talk to you a little bit about this executive director role in training, and should the executive director be present? Should they be conducting training? Should they just be, on the side? Like how does that kind of fit? Jeffrey, I'll have you go first.
Well, as they say, how I'm going to respond to this question, please put your oxygen mask on first as you hear this response and then help others. I believe that board training should be involved with all of the senior staff of the organization. And I'll tell you why, Julia, because we have a generation of upcoming board member, executive directors, that if they've not received good board training and they've not seen governance at work, how would they be good executive directors? the board training has to be part of a next generation process for the next generation of execs to understand the importance of governance and their role in that. So first of all, I think it is an open process. And number two, executive directors, I believe, need to see themselves as stewards of a learning agenda. And what that means is you pick up every single board agenda and you ask yourself, is this a learning meeting or is this a telling meeting? Because if all we're doing is bringing citizens and community members into the room to tell them something, are we really learning something about our community and our organization's role in that? You have to look at every board agenda as a learning agenda.
I love that concept. I think that like completely changes the discussion and the attitude. And also, I have to say, Joan, I almost feel like it puts more responsibility on that board member showing up. It's just like, it's not a matter of sitting there, raising your hand, yay or nay, right? I'm also intrigued, and I love, because Jeffrey, I agree with you on this piece about next gen training. Joan, I've got to believe that for some boards, they're going to be a little uncomfortable or feel like it's not appropriate to have that C-suite or additional leadership in the training. What are you seeing?
Well, this is part of building a cohesive organization, isn't it? Yeah, we live in the discomfort sometimes of things that don't feel like what we've done. I would say to an organization who says board members are uncomfortable with our C-suite leaders being in the meeting, what were you planning to do in that meeting? Because the only reason we would not want them present is if we were going to have discussions that in some way were not helpful to them. Well, let's get that off the agenda, right? Let's not have that be part of this learning experience. But the power of learning together, staff and board, really solidifies the partnership that exists. This idea that we are all partners in shepherding this community cause is just enhanced by every opportunity that we have to learn together. Staff will then know what the board has heard, and board will know that staff has heard it as well. That's a recipe for a stronger partnership.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me, Joan, that it builds. One of the things I see as I travel across this country and work with different nonprofits is the mysterious nature of board versus staff, and how staff is often intimidated by them. They're fearful. They put them at a different level than they really should be, right? Which is not healthy. So I love this concept of bringing everybody together so that everybody knows what the direction is, for good or for bad, right? It's not that everything's been solved, but just that idea of bringing everybody together. And then Jeffrey, I think it's really important what you said, understanding this next gen leadership, that we haven't prepared our next level of leaders the way we should have, and this can assist in that. It might not be our organization that benefits from it, but ultimately it's our community, right?
And Julia, we see a lot of great fundraising finance program people who've come up the ranks, but they've had absolutely no board experience. And yet that will be their Achilles heel in crashing their careers. And yet we ask ourselves, what runway did we give these professionals to learn how to work with boards when they were excluded from training? And the difference between board training and governance training, I would go so far as to say, if you're doing governance training, every committee member also needs to be in that same room, because committees need to feel like they understand their role in governance. They are not a silo in the back of the farm that then comes to the fruition of the board. People need to understand, okay, this is what a committee does, this is what a task force does, this is our governance at work. If all the people who participate in governance are not in governance training, how in the world will we have an effective process?
Right. Well, and we just spend so much time spinning our wheels because there'll be like a cadre of people that are like working and understanding one piece, and then there's this input from another group and it doesn't jive, or you have one group say, oh, well, we can't do that. And it's like, well, wait a minute, why can't we? Or, all of the stumbling blocks. We don't have a lot of time left, and this has been such a riveting conversation. I want to let our viewers and our listeners know whether you're with us today live or you're joining us through our archive, this is a discussion that we're going to continue moving forward with third sector monthly. We're going to be talking about how interim leadership and management changes, how leadership is changing in our nonprofit sector. It's going to be riveting. And I think these are pieces that you can put together in that puzzle that you're dealing with your nonprofit, whether you think you're successful or not. I loved what you said, Joan. Everybody's going to leave. So let's be thinking about this and let's be talking about this, and not just dealing with a crisis, right? I think that's incredible. I want to chat with the two of you about your Board Chair Academy to Go. Board chairs, ooh, been some great ones and some not such great ones. Talk to us, Jeffrey, about this Board Chair Academy to Go.
You know, Julia, I think that we have, as a sector, done ourselves a disservice by talking about succession planning as only meaning the CEO position.
Yep.
Succession planning in a community-based organization is also about leadership at the volunteer level. Board Chair Academy is not for folks who are board chairs. They certainly are welcome, and we want them to be there. What we want is we want to contribute to a pipeline of the next generation of board chairs. We want people to see that they are equipped, engaged, and empowered to lead with their fellow community members into some level of higher ground of community service. What Board Chair Academy does is we want to work with your organization to do three things. Number one, have tough conversations about what your optimal board should look like. Number two, turn the theory of board practices into board outcomes. And third, to talk about the pipeline of talent development so that there is a governance process of enthusiastic, engaged, and empowered people for your organization to live its mission statement fully in the community. That requires one-on-one organizational process, and we're happy to come and do that through Board Chairs Academy to Go.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Joan, I again, not a lot of time left. Talk to me about what this might look like in terms of an organization. Is this going to be as powerful for a new organization under $1 million as it is, you know, a venerable organization with a budget over $25 million?
Maybe more powerful. That new small organization who's struggling to find board members. They maybe don't have the cachet that a larger organization has, or the attraction for influential board members. So getting everyone on the same page, being encouraging, helping them define their role can be even more important for a small new organization. And we love working with them.
Yeah, it's really smart because I think you can, until you just said this, I haven't really thought of it in this way, but you can sidestep a lot of bad behavior, right? If you kind of get everybody started out working correctly, then you don't go to that like, oh man, we've been doing this wrong for 20 years, or we got to change these attitudes. And it's so hard versus if we had started out a certain way. Well, Board Chair Academy to Go. You can get more information about this on thirdsectorcompany.com. That's thirdsectorcompany.com, as well as a lot of other resources. You know, we had your team on in November, December of 24, talking about this amazing research and white paper that you had come up with about the state of the interim, you know, leadership sector and what's going on. Riveting information. So when you go to thirdsector.com, you can get a lot of information that will help you and your organization understand, you know, what the future can look like and how you can be rowing in the same direction. Joan Brown, Chief Operating Officer for Third Sector Company. Always a joy to be with you, my friend, and hear your wisdom. Of course, Jeffrey R. Wilcox, the captain of the ship at Third Sector Company. And truly one of our very first guests with the nonprofit show 5+ years ago. So it's really exciting, Jeffrey, I would say to see your leadership grow and your influence grow across, you know, the nonprofit sector. But it's super impressive to see this cadre of leaders that you're sending out across our country to train.
Thank you. Well, you know what? It's just good work together, Julia, and we're thrilled and proud to be a sponsor of the Nonprofit Show. And you deserve a huge thank you over the past 5 years of what you've done to bring us together to form community.
Well, thank you. It's a lot of fun. Every day I get to meet super interesting people and have these discussions like we've had today with you and Joan, and it just fills my cup. It's really a lot of fun. Again, we're going to be working with the experts from Third Sector Company each month, and we're going to be talking about different aspects of leadership that really, to my mind, they're all linked together by the notion of change. As Joan said, nobody stays forever, and if we're not thinking about that, as Jeffrey mentioned, we've got to be pulling up this next wave of leadership so that we're not in continual crisis mode. And so definitely, follow along with us as we have these amazing discussions. Again, we are blessed and amazed by our presenting sponsors, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Fundraisers Friday, our new Friday episodes just dedicated to fundraisers. Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out. Okay, you two, I'm like super amped up to go out there and do a better job for the board service that I give to my community. And you've given me a new way to frame my 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Hey, everybody, as we end each and every episode of the Nonprofit Show, we leave with this mantra. And it means so many different things to me every day when I say it. And today, yet again, it means something different. And it's simple, but it's complex. It goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. See you again.